Hey folks, and welcome to Skeptic Voices, the brainstorm production that spends more time on getting to know the people in our community and less time on the issues. As skeptics, we spend more of our time learning, debating, and educating than we do on other pursuits. But we're still all people with families, jobs, home lives, and other things we value. I spend a little bit of time, whenever I get a chance, with one of my favorite members of the skeptic community and get to know them on a more personal level, instead of just debating ideas. This interview was with Ian Bushfield, president of the BC Humanist Association and one of my newer friends in the atheist and skeptic movement. Ian contacted me in the late fall or early winter of 2016 through the Brainstorm podcast, and we became fast friends. He's shown himself to be a good voice for humanism and secularism in Canada, as well as a good progressive critical thinker. I really enjoyed talking to him, and I hope you enjoy it. So here it is, my interview with Ian Bushfield. Welcome to Skeptic Voices. This is the podcast that's getting to know the people in our community. Today I have Ian Bushfield with me. And Ian, where would people know you from?
I'm currently the executive director of the British Columbia Humanist Association. I'm on Twitter at iBushfield. In my spare time, I run a unrelated politics podcast about BC politics called Politicos, and we've been doing that for just over a year. And I guess, I don't know, I'm pretty active on Facebook as well. So I'm that guy on the internet. I'm, as far as I can tell, the only Ian Bushfield that's ever existed, for as generic as my name sounds.
Right.
If you have heard of an Ian Bushfield, it's probably me.
Yeah, there's only the one, hey?
Yeah.
Right on.
Blessing and a curse.
Yeah, I suppose. That way you can't be mistaken for somebody else either.
Exactly.
I guess part of this, like I say, this project, the Skeptic Voices project, is just to get to know the people in our community instead of talking about issues or because we spend a lot of time talking about various subjects external to ourselves. So I guess just to get to know you, where did you grow up? What is a bit of your background?
Sure. I grew up just outside of Calgary in southern Alberta on a farm, family farm. My dad's side of the family had emigrated to Alberta over 100 years ago, sort of one of those potato famines in Ireland, and the Bushfields moved to the North Americas just to set up a farm and, get by. Right. And my mom was born in London, England, grew up in Toronto, and moved to Alberta for work. She was a lab tech in Wetaskiwin for a while, and eventually moved to Calgary and met my dad there. And we lived in the same family farm for my entire life. They only moved a few years ago after I went off to university because Calgary developers bought it out right at the peak of a boom. So the family did pretty well off that.
Nice,
but then
nice.
The market all crashed, and so they didn't actually have to move anytime soon. So it worked out really well for them.
Just the perfect timing then.
Yeah, exactly. They're doing great. And so they built this giant new mansion that I go and visit them at, and I'm like, this is a little different than I grew up. It's not that we were poor, but we weren't, the wealthiest family on the block.
Right. Yeah, it's quite a bit different to go see where your parents live if it's a mansion versus your house that you grew up in.
For sure. Yeah, so it was a grain farm. My dad had wheat and barley and farming. I think I don't know if this was true or not, but supposedly one of my first words was tractor, because I was that kind of rural country boy. Probably plenty of us, right?
Yep, for sure. I know a lot. My cousin's kid actually was like that.
Yeah, and then we also had some egg-laying chickens, so I had to go pick eggs every so often and mow a bunch of grass and take the bus to school and all that kind of stuff. So, did you have other livestock? No, we had the chickens for a while. Eventually, Hutterites bought them out. We had barn cats of varying numbers, as you do. They sort of keep their own population in check.
Yeah,
my mom we went to get a dog once from the SPCA, and they asked my mom about other pets, and she said, we have some cats, and they asked what kept the population down, and she almost said the coyotes, but realized that would not go over well with the Humane Society people, right?
Yeah, that sounds not that great.
But we got the dog, and she was sweet for a long time.
Good. So you went to school in Calgary then, or in a nearby community?
Nearby community. So I went to school in Airdrie. I went to, Edwards Elementary, forget the middle school. I was Airdrie Middle School. They were all like French English schools, but I was in the English programs. Public school system. Alberta, as you know, has the dual funded public and Catholic schools. The Catholic schools were always like where kids got sent if they got kicked out of public school, in my experience. Like maybe the Catholic school will clean them up or something, or at least
right.
That's where you have to send them.
That's where you send
right?
the bad kids.
Yeah. And yeah, I went to high school. I remember in high school, because my family never went to church. We didn't really do religion. We weren't like actively atheist or anything, but we just like we celebrated Christmas and Easter, but Easter was more about chocolate and Christmas was more about presents and Santa and food.
Oh, okay.
But I remember in high school biology, our teacher was introducing the evolution unit, and he's like, well, I know some of you will probably not believe in this, but just learn it for the test and you can forget it after. And I was like, that's very weird, because I didn't really clue in to the religious makeup of Southern Alberta, which I'm figuring out more and more is a lot more polarized than we tend to think about it. It's very, you're either like evangelical, go to church religiously, as it were, or you're kind of a secular libertarian type, at least in Alberta.
Oh, interesting. I didn't realize that it was quite like that. Like, I guess I knew there was a pretty staunch religious community in Alberta, but I guess I kind of figured that took over the whole thing mostly, except for a very small group.
Well, if you look at the census, Alberta's the second least religious province after BC.
That's interesting. I guess you get those big centers, Calgary and Edmonton probably makes up a lot of that, eh?
A bit. One thing I'm actually reading is this history book right now about BC during the settler era of the 1880s to 1910 and the irreligion in there. And they found that BC was actually very non-religious at that time. And I think Alberta was similar, but a little bit more religious. And what it was all these young men moving out west who wanted to spend more time drinking and gambling and going to brothels and things like that. And when they went to church, they got yelled at for all those fun things, right? And so,
yeah, you can't go to church and then go to the brothel at the same time. So,
yeah, so I think we sort of forget about the like non-religious history of Western Canada. That's probably just under the surface. But I'm only just starting to think about that, and it's interesting.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, historical context is often really like the last 10 years or 20 years, right? Like we don't really look very far back when we think about things very often.
Yeah, and the major centers of power were always the church and the British and French empires in Canadian history, right? Right. So we kind of forget about all these others and what people were actually doing on the ground. Like people would identify as Anglican or Methodist or whatever, but never go to church. Like the records show that pretty staunchly, at least in BC. Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you grew up in near Airdrie. You went to school there. What happened? When did you go to college, or where did you go to college?
Yeah, so I was one of those kids who never knew really what I wanted to be when I grew up. I remember taking a career aptitudes test or something in high school, and it said you could be whatever you want. And I'm like, thanks.
That's helpful.
We did this one really dumb exercise where everyone was given a random job, and we were asked, would you be happy with that? And the point was to be, no, you should actually like think about your future. Right. I was like, I'd be happy with mine because I got bartender and it sounded moderately interesting. Right. Yeah. I was like, not going to pay a lot, but it'll be fun at least. Yeah. But I always liked science. And so I ended up enrolling at the University of Alberta for engineering because you could just take a general first year of engineering and then you specialized.
Okay.
And that what's the most interesting thing I could do led me for a while, because after the first year, I had to pick my specialization, and engineering physics seemed like the most interesting, least like, because I like the engineering of bridges, but I don't want to do it or really study it that much because it's pretty simple. But the engineering physics was just, how can we do nanobots and all these other really cutting edge tech. Cool. Yeah. Yeah. And I had the grades for it, so that was helpful as well.
Right.
So yeah, I ended up in engineering physics, and that was going well, but I still didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. And
Right.
the ongoing joke in EngPhys at U of A is EngPhys don't get jobs because what do you do in that?
Right. You're
Realistically,
an
there are like high tech jobs, right? In research, in industry and academia.
Right,
but
yeah.
from there, I looked at graduate school, and that's how I ended up in Vancouver, where I went to do my master's in physics at SFU.
Very cool. So, yeah. So how did you become, or how did you join BC Humanists or become the president of that group?
So it was in undergrad when I started getting involved in student groups. I lived in residence for a couple of years and really liked campus life. And I think one of the clubs fairs, U of A was known for having like the most clubs of any university in Canada. And I'd go through clubs fair and find all these different religious groups, like 24 religious groups, most of them Christian. And I'm like, why do we need 3 different evangelical groups? I was like, where's the atheists? Where's my voice? Because around the same time, I'd started reading Fringula, and this was like 2007. So God Delusion and all that was new and hot and exciting.
Right, yeah.
Remember those naive, optimistic days of the movement?
Yeah, back when the only thing we were fighting against was religion. It was so
and we were
easy.
all on the same side.
Yeah, that's right.
In a way. It was more complicated than that, but let's look through rose-colored glasses. So I got together with some friends over one summer. There was a Edmonton atheist meetup group that I discovered, and I went to a couple of those, and I met some students there, and we said, hey, why don't we start a student group? And so we put that together pretty quick and tabled at the next clubs fair. I think this was 2007 still.
Okay.
And we ended up getting 300 students sign up for our newsletter in that first week.
Wow.
Which was incredible. We were like, oh, there's a market for this, or a demographic that's underserved.
That's wild. That's amazing, actually.
Yeah. So I did that for 2 years, and the club lasted for another 8, I think. Campus groups usually dissolve fairly quickly because of graduation, but that one stuck around, which I was really proud to see.
Students turnover and whatnot.
Yeah. So we used that group to, push the atheist agenda, as it were. We got the role of God reduced in the convocation charge. There was everyone who graduated at U of A, at the ceremony, they read out some, meaningful words. One of the lines of which was, every student should use your degree for the glory of God and honor of your country.
Oh, no.
And I was like, really? This is 2008, 2009. Let's dump that garbage.
Yeah, for sure.
And so we started petitions and letter writing, and eventually I got myself on one of the committees that had authority over this and could push the bureaucracy to move. But the VP academic was a devout religious person, I think Catholic, but he didn't want to change it. And so ultimately we got it changed to, for all who believe to serve your God, plus some lines from like the founder of the university that sounded very humanistic, like the university should be for the uplifting of the whole people and things like that. And I was like, that's
for
good.
The betterment of mankind kind of stuff.
Yeah. And so it was a compromise that I was happy to see move. And ultimately, it was actually just last year that the new VP academic, or one of the senior people at the U of A, went, this line doesn't make any sense. Let's just cut it. And so we finally won in the long term.
Good.
So that's how I got involved in the movement, as it were. And I moved to Vancouver, like I said, for grad school. And I got involved in the SFU Skeptics student group that was there. And here in the city of Vancouver, the BC Humanist Association had been around since the 1980s and had been holding weekly meetings for a couple of years before I got here.
Okay.
And I said, well, I'll go to some of those and get involved. And it was a good group. It was, or it still is, obviously.
One would hope.
Yeah, I have to say that. No, I don't. But it was fun. So I went to these meetings, met the people there. I saw a lot of potential too, because you had this well-established group with some energy. There were many of the people who had founded the group in the 80s are still hanging around. So it was a diverse sort of age range, sort of skewing a bit older, but still had the energy to do more things. And so I said, well, I'll run for the board, get on there. And I think I was secretary the first year, and I got us involved in Pride Parade, and we did that, and it was great fun. And, we built more connections with some of the skeptics groups that were starting up. And
cool.
From there, I was president the following year, and we had some money in the bank because I don't even remember why. I think they just raised it over the years, but never had anything to spend it on.
Oh, okay.
And so I pitched, or it kind of evolved, this idea of if we pay someone to work part-time, we can actually really see if we can make this do something. Whether it can go from a group that just holds, the occasional weekly meetings and meetups and those kind of things, which is great. And we need lots more of those around the country and around the world.
Yeah.
To maybe something that can affect policy and can really, BC has in its school act that our schools must be strictly secular.
Okay.
Which is awesome. That's actually been in there for almost 100 years or more.
Right. Yeah. BC is one of the few places that has something like that, right?
Yeah. And it's a part of BC's history I want to learn a lot more about. But we were still having school districts that distribute Gideon Bibles, for example, to grade 5s. Yeah. And so we wanted to change that. And it takes more time than just volunteers can commit. So they said, all right, we'll hire someone part-time. I applied for that and got that role in 2012, I think. And I worked at it for a year. Sorry, my computer was just about to fall asleep, so I just moved my mouse. Cut this bit.
Yeah, that works.
I worked at it for a year, and then my wife got a job offer in England to do teaching there. And I said, yes, that sounds like fun. Let's go. And so we actually moved to England for 2 years.
Oh, wow.
And at the time, BCHA got a couple, not an interim, a different executive director. He got a better, fuller paying job. We got another ED. And then he quit to move on to other things. And so by the time I came back from England, the role was open again. And luckily I was able to move into it. And since then, we got a big bequest a year ago about $100,000. And we've, the board agreed to put that to like stimulus funding, essentially, to say, let's move Ian to 4 days a week rather than 2, and really try to build the membership, build the organization so it can be self-sustaining. And I think we're actually on a really good path to that. We're up to 200 paid up members now and over 2,000 people on our mailing list.
Holy cow.
And really starting to affect some real change. We were at the Supreme Court of Canada last year arguing for secularism.
Yeah, that was the Trinity case or whatever.
Yeah, the Trinity Western University case, which we could go into a lot more, but that's one of those issues. And it also, the decision is expected this week, so it'll whatever we say right now will probably be out of the date by the time you get this out.
I think on Brainstorm we covered you did a newsletter after you went to it, I think.
Yeah.
And we kind of covered it a little bit on there.
Yeah, I've been putting out a lot of materials about that because I think it is a big part of the work we've been doing. And I'm really proud of the submission we were able to make on a very specific topic. And I heard from a lot of other lawyers say the brief our lawyers wrote was really interesting and really fascinating. They're hopeful that the arguments we made, which were around Trinity Western University as an organization, so it can't claim to have a religion.
Right.
So hopefully that goes somewhere. But
yeah, totally. Yeah,
that's how I got to be in this role.
That's fantastic. So this is your full-time gig then?
Yeah, I work 4 days a week at this,
awesome.
And I do my podcast on the spare time on Fridays, essentially.
Right. So do you, I guess, not to ask too personal of a question, but do you make enough money to live in BC on that job? Isn't the cost of living out there really expensive?
We're pretty privileged. So my wife has a full-time teaching job, and that helps a lot. And I get a living wage. The place we live in, like I said, my parents made some money, and my wife's parents have some money from working in oil industry. So they actually own the condo we're living in right now, and we pay the base rent or expenses on it. So we're pretty privileged in that way. And we'll be moving to somewhere that's just within our budget.
Perfect.
We managed to buy a place that's already gone up in price that's being built. But
geez.
Yeah, we're lucky. But we try to use that privilege for advancing humanity, right? My wife's a teacher who really cares. Today is Pink Shirt Day here in BC.
Oh, yeah.
Which is about, it was originally about ending homophobia and transphobia. And then I think Christy Clark co-opted it to just be like an anti-bullying day because all bullying matters or something like that.
Right. And then the whole country kind of glommed onto that.
Yeah. But the teachers have been really good at really reminding people like, yes, all bullying is bad, but there's a particular problem around anti-LGBTQ bullying.
Yeah.
So she's been, ironically, they sold shirts to the teachers that say, shirts speak louder than words.
Really?
So that's the message the BCTF is putting out on t-shirts for some reason. It's funny, I guess. Maybe someone had a sense of irony or else didn't. And then I try to make sure that through my work and through my hobbies, I guess, that I'm able to promote a better world for everyone.
Yeah. You actually that's something I'm interested in is because you're one of the people that's over the last year or so since I've known you has influenced my views on social justice in a number of ways. And so I'm always kind of pulling to the left the more I learn. And have you always been a social justice advocate, or is this something that you kind of came to during your education, or where did you get that? So
when I was in school, I started thinking more and more about politics. I do remember in around grade 9, we had a social studies assignment where you had to write a short essay about who you would vote for in that election and why. And I think at the time I just said I'd vote Reform because the West needs a voice in Ottawa. And that was actually the pervasive propaganda that just permeates Alberta media. Yeah. And it still does to some extent. That's why Jason Kenney is so popular. It's really pro him. But as I started reading more and thought more about issues, I definitely moved intellectually to the left. Right. In my thinking. And maybe part of that was affected by the fact my brother has cerebral palsy, and so he uses a wheelchair. And so justice issues have always been in my mind. My mom ended up working for the Cerebral Palsy Association in Alberta and became the executive director there. And so accessibility and making sure that the same opportunities are available to him as were available to me has always been at the forefront. And then not growing up with religion, when I got to university and started reading more and learning more about issues facing same-sex couples or the LGBTQ community, they just sort of followed naturally, I think, from that idea of, well, people should have equal opportunity. Yeah, but there are obvious systemic issues, especially as you learn in education. Right.
Yeah. So it's kind of been part of your life for a long time anyway.
Yeah, I remember, I think in like high school, early university, I had a very strong punk phase as well, where I really liked some of the anarchist, socialist, communist stuff. Nice. And then like it kind of tempered down. I was more like a pragmatic social democrat for a while. And then this last couple of years have just been like, well, we clearly need to burn capitalism down, but
yeah, that's kind of where I'm at this point. I did like a few interviews the last few days, and it's funny how, I don't know if it's intentional. Well, it isn't intentional, but like every conversation I seem to have it ends up with this like anti-capitalist rant coming out of somebody.
Like, and I still, like a part of me still, and like I obviously benefit from the perks of capitalism, and like there's the theses that Steven Pinker has in The Better Angels of Our Nature, and I'll have ample criticism for Steve Pinker, but I think his aim, I believe, is true. Like he wants to see a better world, and he does genuinely believe, and I do have sympathy for that idea that the world is better than it was 100 years ago. Absolutely. Or whatever. Yeah. I think that's fairly irrefutable. That doesn't mean we shouldn't keep trying to make it better. Exactly. But one of the things he puts in there is this idea that global trade has reduced nations' desire to go to war with each other. Like the ever closer union of the European Union and the trade alliances they've made have meant there hasn't been a major conflict in Europe in the longest period of time ever.
I suppose that makes sense, eh? It's to some extent like and the nations that aren't traded with are often the ones that have the most conflict type thing.
Yeah, you look at North Korea, that's basically isolated from the world, and they have less qualms about going to war than, say, China, that's becoming integrated with the global economy. And so I see those arguments, but I've never said I'm against international trade. It's one of those sort of myths about the left that we're very nationalist, right? I think the big issue is, and international trade's a complex issue that I don't fully understand, so I won't keep us here too long. But, you know, at the international level, one thing I really liked about the European Union was that people were treated as equally as capital. And so people could move around to where they wanted to work.
Right.
As easily as you could ship goods. And that feels just to me.
Yeah, that makes more sense than all these limits on where you can move around to and find your opportunities and whatnot.
Yeah. And then there's my like naive optimism of like, could we just tear down all the borders? Like if you even look at some of the old humanist statements, like the Second Manifesto talks about a global federation for the planet.
Right.
They were optimistic in the 70s.
Yeah, no kidding, hey? They hadn't reached the Wall Street 80s yet.
Yeah. Well, like the 1930s Humanist Manifesto talks about essentially reorganizing the economy in favor of people and almost ending private property. Like it's borderline communist. And then the Second Humanist Manifesto is like, so there's some problems with communism.
Right.
It's interesting to read all of them in sort of progression and see how
the
broad thinking has moved. But I do believe it's always been a progressive worldview.
Right, yeah. So, I guess back to your life, how long have you been married?
I got married in 2011, so it's now almost 7 years.
Oh, geez. That's pretty good.
Yeah, we met in undergrad through physics parties and things like that.
Nice.
And then moved in together a couple years later. I moved to Vancouver. She moved here the year after she finished her degree. And we got married shortly after that.
Cool. How old are you?
I am 32.
Okay, yeah. It seems like everybody I talk to these days is like younger than me by at least 5 years, but they're all so much more advanced in their thinking than I am. Like I spent so many years, I guess, just getting drunk and doing drugs and working to make money to do those things that I just I missed out on a lot of education.
I guess that was my privilege because I definitely got drunk a lot in undergrad.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess I didn't have to, work to pay the bills for it. So
yeah,
or work as much. I
did go to university. What year was that? I think it was 2000. I went to university, and I finished my first year, and then in 2001, I might be getting my years mixed up, but either way, my second year, I got the first semester. They said, well, your grades aren't good enough. You need to take a break and then come back and see if you can come back in 6 months or something. And then I just never did.
Yeah, sometimes like university I found really valuable, but it's less like the things I learned in university I won't really be using. So it was more in some ways, the badge to put behind my name. And in some other ways, just showing that or teaching me to learn and teaching me sort of tools to think.
Yeah, I think that's something that I see with a lot of people, and that I missed was that ability to like that learning how to learn throughout like those years that you spend learning how to read and research and doing all that the work basically, and then I had to figure that out on my own later. And it's, it was a bit of a mission, but
well, yeah. And I definitely don't know if I'd ever try to describe myself as advanced in my thinking. I just try to make sure that when I need to learn about a topic or I want to know more about a topic, that I can at least discern some good sources to go to and have that sort of skeptical approach and, talk to the academics. And that's what I really like doing on my podcast when we talk about politics, is bringing on economists rather than politicians, or bringing on academics or activists and people who can talk about an issue without having to put it through a partisan lens and just be like, well, here's what this, policy around taxing houses in this way will do. Right. And then we can think about whether that advances the kind of society we want or not.
Yeah, I had a friend a few years ago. I was posting some stuff that kind of was off the mark, and he sent me a basic economics text to read. So I read through it, but it seemed like a lot of it was almost skewed libertarian, or like very American right wing. I don't know if that's a thing in economics. Like, it seemed like this textbook certainly had that same kind of mentality, that trickle down economics type mentality.
I've never actually taken a formal economics course or business courses. I do get my sense of it is the 101 level stuff is very, I don't know, big on assumptions, and those assumptions can be true or not, and they don't seem to matter as much there. I find when I talk to economists who are working in the field, they do tend to have a more nuanced view of reality, and that people aren't these rational agents that Adam Smith and the economists of 200 years ago believed we were, or some skeptics believe we are these days.
Yeah, geez.
But we're, we're monkeys with PCs.
Yeah, exactly. Barely evolved.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess, you said you have a brother with cerebral palsy?
Yeah, my younger brother. He's still living with my parents and trying to figure out his life. And I do have an older brother. He's like 8 years older than me, and he's got a child now, and he's living in Edmonton, and
that's cool.
They're sort of doing their thing. So 3 different paths of life, I guess.
Right, eh? That's good though. I mean,
for sure.
Yeah. Are you, again, this might be too personal. Are you and your wife considering having children in the future?
Potentially one day. Not at the moment. We're she's just getting settled in her job because we're back from Canada we've been back in Canada for 2 years now, and the way the school system works here, she wanted to get into a school, and so she was teacher on call for a year, and now she's got a full-time job teaching the physics classes that she wants to be teaching, high school physics, which she loves, and she wants to teach that for a full year, maybe teach another year, and we'll go from there.
Okay. I just had a weird thing happen.
That'll happen.
With my phone. I have a home phone, because that way my son's school can always call and leave a message, or if my son needs to call or whatever. But it just spoke for some reason. I'm not sure why. Oh, well. So I guess, what is the kind of thing that you and say your friends do? Are all your friends part of skepticism or atheism?
Pretty much all my friends are non-religious.
Okay.
And I would say support the work I do or have been involved in some way in the past, but not all are active these days. And so lots of friends are sort of on the periphery of, like, they take a skeptical worldview and they're interested in sci-fi stuff like I am, but it's not to say they'd come out to Skeptics in the Pub or anything like that.
Right. It seems like a lot of people who have a skeptical worldview quite often are hesitant to be part of what they see online, like the community or activism. So I can't blame people for not wanting to be for being on the periphery, as you say.
Sure. And I should say I also have tons of friends in the skeptical community here in Vancouver. And I do find it is and that was one of the reasons I joined these groups when I moved out here, was to meet people and make friends and that kind of thing. And so
that's cool.
Yeah, there's that mix in there. And
yeah, I was just talking to
you're definitely right about the online community and the sense it gives. And also just the idea of like a skeptics meeting is hard to get around to people because they're like, you want to just like meet up and complain about things, and it doesn't always sound fun to people.
No, that's right. I was just talking to one of the guys from our Center for Inquiry Regina group, which is kind of our only skeptical group in Regina. And the group in Saskatoon, they have weekly get-togethers. They watch movies. They're all, it seems like they have a very close-knit community. And they all manage to get together every week or whatever for whatever they want to do. And me and Dan were talking, and he's just like, yeah, you can't get people out to events in Regina. It's just not a thing you can do. Yeah,
that can be tough here in Vancouver too. It's a very,
is that right?
Well, it's sometimes known or nicknamed as a no fun city or a very hard to meet people city. There's whole videos about that joke.
Right.
I think part of it is Vancouver's always had a very transient population, like a lot of people coming or going as a port city and all of that. But also a lot of the bars close early, and there's been a lot of weird liquor restrictions that makes it also a bit harder to have fun, the no fun city stuff. And so,
yeah, I remember when, it was quite a few years ago now, when smoking was initially banned in Victoria, I think, in bars. And I was out there. I stayed with my mom for a bit, and I didn't know anybody, so I'd go out to a bar. But then you got to always go out to have a cigarette.
Right.
It was a tough, like Victoria was a tough place to meet anybody. So,
well, I do remember the week that smoking in bars got banned in Edmonton when I was living there, because it went from you went to nightclubs or bars,
right,
and then came home reeking.
Yeah.
Of cigarette smoke, and you had to like shower 3 times before it was off you, to it was clear air. Just like instantly.
That's right.
That was so much better.
Yeah. I didn't think it was better because I was a smoker at the time.
Sure.
But
in Edmonton in minus 40 smoking would be miserable.
Right, yeah. But since quitting, it's no smoking in public places is like amazing. And then me and my girlfriend just went to Las Vegas for a few days, and they have some of the casinos down there on the old strip on Fremont Street. You can smoke in them, and you go in and it smells awful. Like it's just a totally different thing.
Yeah, for sure.
So what do you do for fun out there?
Oh, Vancouver's a great city for that in some ways, because I always skied a lot as a kid, and my dad was a really not professional skier, but he was really involved in a ski club, and so we'd always have family ski trips at Easter and a few other times a year. And so here, living so close to Whistler is just amazing. Like when I was in grad school, they had cheaper seasons passes, which were still like $800 or $1,000, but for a daily ski at Whistler, or no, it was like $500, because a daily ski at Whistler is like $100, which is a lot. I think it's 120 now. But when you could go 10 times for, half price essentially as a student,
right,
and it's just like a 2-hour drive or something, or there are buses and things like that.
Yeah,
and then there's all the North Shore mountains, and I love camping as well. And BC is just fantastic for that, because mountains and forests and all of that stuff.
Yeah,
hiking. For
sure. We went out, actually, we were in BC, it's got to be 3 years ago now with the kids. And we went to like a campground with camper cabins. And I helped the campground people build a barbecue, because they had to supply barbecues because you weren't allowed to have campfires.
Oh, okay.
It was such a dry year, and there was like forest fire watches all over the place. So
yeah, that global warming's a bitch.
Yeah, no kidding, eh?
Yeah, so camping and skiing have always been my family would always do big camping trips, and we went all over, and so
that's cool.
I wanted to keep up with that, and so we have the big Thule for our car that doesn't fit into our garage, so we have to shove it in a storage locker. And
oh, geez,
still worth it, because we can go out to the island, or we can go into the interior. We need to do a bunch more trips, because there's so much of this province that we still haven't seen, despite all of those trips as a kid.
It's actually a really great place to just visit different areas of.
It's the most beautiful place on earth, according to our license plates.
Well, I might even give it to him. I might believe that. It's pretty nice. Although we just drove out east here this last summer, and it's pretty nice too. Like lots of lush green bush and like trees all over the place, and hills and mountains all over the place. Like coming from Saskatchewan, that's quite the change.
Yeah, it's definitely worth exploring this country if you're able to.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and then otherwise, we meet up with friends and either just go hang out the pub and shoot the shit or play board games a bit more. We're starting to get into that.
That's cool.
Yeah. My wife does running. I'm not big into the sports or being fit, I guess. Probably should at some point.
Yeah, skiing is a thing that needs you to be sort of fit, right?
Yeah. I should generally try to work out more just so that when I do my first ski run, because I can usually ski most of the hill, which means I usually push myself pretty hard, and then I feel like shit. But
right. Then you're sore for a week after. Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe balancing my life would be a bit smarter. But it feels like there's never enough time, right? You know that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I'm just now getting back into going to the gym regularly, and I'm hoping that I can maintain this momentum that I'm on. I'm always impressed by your photos and pictures from the gym and your updates. Yeah, it's but it was a couple months between visits to the gym, so.
Yeah, I do enjoy biking, and so when I have reasons to commute somewhere or go to a meeting, I'll either walk at least so I get the steps in, because I work from home. So there'll be, if I don't force myself to do something or go out, I could have 300 steps in a day, and that's kind of pitiful and makes you feel bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, I also like biking. I need to get a better bike, and Vancouver's actually a really good city to bike in. The hills are annoying, but the infrastructure is really coming along. So we have tons of bike lanes. That's lot of awesome. People also bike, which makes it more not just socially acceptable, but safer. Since cars know what to do around you.
Yeah, it's common practice kind of thing.
Yeah, like in Calgary, there was no one who biked. I think it's changed a bit now in the downtown core, but I remember biking into North Calgary a couple times when I was in high school from the family farm, and once you got into the subdivisions, it was still just a bit more dicey. Yeah,
I see people biking around here sometimes, and it looks like it's, depending on the area, it's not bad, but some areas it just seems so dangerous, and people don't give a shit. They just drive like assholes.
Yeah. So,
but there are some good paths around Regina actually too.
That's cool.
Yeah. So have you been skiing your whole life, or is that a thing you picked up as an adult, or?
It's definitely always been in my memory. So I don't know when I first started learning. My dad, like I said, we always went on an Easter ski trip. Our Easters would either be at Kelowna or Vernon, and we'd either go to Silver Star or Big White, nice. Rent a cottage or a condo for a week there, because they had some really good deals, and just do skiing. And so I always remember doing ski lessons there. And then in high school, me and some friends would go out to Sunshine or some of the Rocky Mountain resorts near Calgary all the time. And so, yeah, it's been a long time in my life, and I was really excited. I think it was just before we moved to England when I got a good deal on some really nice skis for Whistler, but it was still dropping $800.
Oof.
But well, I had to, because the snow at Whistler is so much different than the Rockies. It's so much wetter and fluffier, which means almost every day you go up there is fresh powder, because it snows. It can snow dump a meter of snow every week.
Oh, geez.
I remember that one winter, and I went up quite a bit that year. And so you need nice fat skis with rounded edges so you can sort of float above it all. But yeah, it's a ton of fun, and I've not injured myself yet.
Right. Skiing was never a thing I really even considered. I know there are some places in Saskatchewan where you can go skiing, but it was never a thing that was on my plate of things to do, I guess.
Yeah, it's definitely more of a Alberta, BC, or maybe out east thing even.
Yeah.
My brother also got involved in skiing through disabled skiing, and my dad shifted over from his more extreme skiing side to becoming an instructor in that, which was really cool to see. And then my brother would have weekly ski lessons at Canada Olympic Park in Calgary, which is the little hill there. And so I'd get like $10 passes to go skiing there on the evenings. And so you could go, it's the kind of hill where you can make like 2 or 3 turns if you're not trying. And so you just like loop up and down, and it gets a little boring, but you know, lets you practice your style and things like that. And so
for, it would be great for a beginner type thing.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a great place for beginners, even just like, you know, improving on your technique. And I think they had a couple little parks if you're more into the snowboarding or jumps and things like that, which I never got into.
Yeah. I always wanted to snowboard because I was into skateboarding as a teenager. And those seemed to always go hand in hand. But like I say, the hills in Weyburn were not great.
Yeah, you don't think of Saskatchewan as the skiing capital of Canada.
No, that's right. I'm curious, like, about having a differently abled brother and how it affected your family life. Like, I mean, my family has its own issues, but growing up, we didn't have to accommodate anybody who had different abilities or had difficulties with things. So I'm curious how that affected your family life.
It's hard to, I've had that question asked to me before, and I have never really known how to answer it because I only have one anecdote, right? I don't have like a control life to compare against. So my life felt normal. Like I was never really denied things I wanted to do as a child. And so, like I said, we went camping. My family just meant Tyler had to get the bottom bunk because we couldn't lift him to the top bunk. And we had to make sure we had a truck that could also fit the wheelchair. And he's a bit bigger now, so they've done a bit less camping and they have a cottage now instead that's accessible. But like I said, they got him into skiing. It meant we could go to movies, and whoever went with him got a free pass as a wheelchair attendant. And so there was actually a lot of advantages in a way.
Is that right?
Well, like little things that try to make sure it's more accessible. And I'm not saying it's like the world is tilted for the disabled. It obviously isn't, right?
Obviously
but
not. But
there were little things like that where I remember at Calgary Stampede, there would always be a morning where kids with disabilities could get in free and people could come with them at a reduced rate. And so that's how we go to Stampede, you know, and he'd get to ride the rides in Kids Land or whatever when he was little. And then we'd go hang out at the rest of the Stampede for the day. Because that's what you do in Calgary in the summer, right?
Right.
You eat pancakes and go to Stampede. And when you're older, you get drunk every night.
Yeah. I have a friend who lives in Calgary now, and she's always, like, her whole year is looking forward to Stampede. So I don't quite get it myself, but
you have to go one time. I will say that.
Okay. I'll try and make a trip sometime.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I think my family's approach was always to make sure we do everything we want to do or would otherwise do. And we'll just make sure we have the ways to bring him along, or not even just bring him along, but engage him. And so we had wheelchair vans, and it meant a few more like hospital trips for checkups or different surgeries. And he was in surgery for a while. One time when I was in high school, and I went and visited frequently. And like, I remember reading, I think, the 4th book of Harry Potter.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah. You know, so it was different in some ways, but it wasn't like, yeah, you sort of, you work with the cards you're dealt.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. It's interesting to talk to people who have different experiences. Like I like I say, like, my family didn't have anybody who was differently abled, but my mom did have mental illness. But as long as she was on her medication, we didn't know the difference, right? Like, life was, I mean, she knew the difference, but for us kids growing up, life was just the way it was. And my mom seemed like slightly different than other parents' moms or other kids' moms, and that was that. But so, like you say, you just deal with the hand that you have, and you just, that's what you know. Yeah,
for sure. Like, my brother has always loved video games, and so the rest of it, or me and my older brother, and so we always played video games together, and that was fine. And
for sure.
Yeah.
I suppose you probably have always had the opportunity to play video games. Like, it's kind of, they've always existed in your life.
Yeah, pretty much. So I was born in 1986, and so some of the stuff was very new then, but my family did get a first computer, like a Tandy 1000 that you had to put a floppy disk in to launch DOS. And then
Right.
we even got dial-up internet, I think in like 94 or 95.
Oh, geez.
So
Nice.
my family was always pretty cutting edge on those things as well.
That's pretty good.
And I don't even know like who was the driver in that, because my dad's not very techie. Like he's
Oh,
a
no?
farmer, and he's only ever really used the computers for playing mahjong when we were growing up.
Right.
He's got a smartphone now finally, but he had a bag phone for like 20 years that he plugged into his car, and he was kind of proud of it. He's like, if you need to call me, I'll be in my car.
Well, you know, those things could get a signal anywhere.
Yeah, that was probably part of it too.
Yeah, I know my dad sprayed crops for custom spraying for a long time, and he had a bag phone, and because something about the wattage that they have, they can actually get a signal just about anywhere. I know that a lot of the farmers around here were really disappointed that when they stopped selling those or giving those to people who bought them or whatever.
Right. Yeah, and so we had all the game systems. Well, not all of them, but we had all the Nintendos, I think, over the years from NES onward. My
Right.
older brother was also really into video games, so he definitely made sure to have Nintendo, Super Nintendo, N64, GameCube,
Nice.
a couple others in there as well, PlayStations, and then a bunch of the PC games when those came out.
I sometimes I think about the life my kids have, and the difference, because when I grew up on a farm, you had to figure out what to do, and it's so much easier in a sense because you can go play a video game. If you're bored, just go play a video game. But
Yeah, well,
I try
now
not
we
to
have
make value judgments about it. But
No, yeah.
but it does seem like much easier to avoid boredom.
Well, and now we have a Google Home in our house, so we ask it random questions about the world all the time. Like, we don't even look at our phone for the weather or anything like that. I'm thinking about it like, if we have kids, they're going to grow up in this world of AI digital assistants.
Right.
Like, I've even asked it some questions that a kid would ask, and it like answers. They've programmed it smartly to not answer in a terrible way, but
yeah, that's good.
we even asked it what its pronouns were, and it said it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and thanks for asking.
And thanks for asking. That's good.
Don't tell the center lords, though. No, the SJWs have infected Google. Well, they already know that, right?
That's true, yeah, because James Damore got fired.
Yeah. It's all a conspiracy.
Yeah, that's right. My son actually asked me today, he saw on the cover of a magazine, it says BDSM. And it's just like an article discussing the psychology of members of that group. And he asked me what it was, and I was thinking, that's the kind of thing that he could ask a Google Home or an Alexa or something, and it would totally give him a Wikipedia type answer.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
And I have to give him like, well, I think I know a little bit about this, but I'm going to be way off base, I'm sure.
Yeah. And how do you frame that in sort of child-friendly language?
Yeah.
But things are changing fast. Like, my wife will tell me about some of her students who introduce themselves with their pronouns, and like one of her students transitioned the other year and just said, I go by so-and-so now, and everyone was just cool with it. That's
fantastic.
And maybe that's just like Metro Vancouver, super progressive Tumblr kids, but it starts there, right? And you see this with the Parkland kids who are speaking up. Like, kids are smart these days. They'll be all right.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm actually more hopeful lately than I have been in a long time because of the Parkland kids and like some of the young people I've seen online. They get it. Like, we spend our time arguing with guys my age or guys who are in their mid 30s who have been used to a certain type of world, and young people just get it.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I keep wondering about, like, what's the point when I'm going to feel left behind? Like, where they're way ahead of me. Like, I don't get Snapchat. I've never downloaded it. I've never used it. I don't get the appeal of it. I've read about it, but that's like the first thing that's come out that I'm like, no, not for me. I'm too old for that.
I actually get Snapchat to some degree. But there's these new apps that kids can use that look like regular other apps, like a calculator or a weather app, and they can hide photos in these other apps. And my girlfriend's also a teacher, and she had to show me that this is a thing that they showed that the teachers talked about at convention.
Right.
It was like this. Oh, wow. So kids are, they're like, our parents kind of thought that they knew what we were doing and they had no idea. And so now we still kind of think that we know what our kids are doing and we have no idea.
Like, I remember back in my day, you had to download the TI-83 boobs game or something like that.
That's right.
Or there was a drug smuggling one, I remember.
There was I can't remember the name of the game that we had to, it had to be sneakily put on the single computer that our group of friends had access to because that was also their parents' computer. So,
right.
It was, Leisure Suit Larry. I think that's what it was.
I remember that game.
Yeah. Silliness. But it's been almost an hour here. So I guess before I let you go, where can anybody find stuff you produce?
Sure. Like I said, if you Google Ian Bushfield, you will find lots of stuff about me, and for better or worse. My Twitter is iBushfield. I'm on Facebook, Ian.Bushfield, and most of my stuff there is public, so you can just follow it. I turned off commenting for strangers because that gets annoying and it bothers me after a while, and then it just sort of sits in the back of my head. So,
because some people are really awful.
Yeah, and I just personally don't, like on my personal page, don't want to spend time mulling about an argument with someone I'm a vague acquaintance of for a while. I can go into those spaces and have those discussions, but my page is mine and I'll do with it as I want.
Yep.
You can find my politics podcast, Politicoast, at politicos.ca, or it's on Twitter, PoliticosPod, and all the places podcasts are found. What else do I make? The BC Humanist Association is at bchumanist.ca. You can sign up for the newsletter there. We put it out every week with both the events that are coming up and a statement on the world or campaign issue or some of the things we've done recently.
Very cool.
Yeah, I think that's most of the main ones.
Right on. Well, thanks for joining me.
No problem. Thank you, Corey.
Have yourself a good one.
You too.
All right, that's it for the interview. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Skeptic Voices, the podcast for getting to know the people in our community. I want to thank Ian for joining me, and I want to apologize to my listeners for being so intermittent with these episodes. I wanted to do them more often, but apparently I'm quite busy. You can find more from Ian at bchumanist.ca and politicos.ca, or you can follow him on Twitter at iBushfield. I think that's all. So for anything else, you can email me at mail@brainstormblog.net and check out the show notes on brainstormblog.net and thebrainstormpodcast.com. If you want to hear more of these, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast player. I highly recommend using Beyond Pod, where you can just search for your favorite Brainstorm-related project. You can follow all our various shows on your regular Brainstorm podcast feed, or you can follow each show on its own. I'd love it if you could go and rate and review all my shows on Apple Podcasts, Facebook, or anywhere else that you rate and review things, and share the hell out of them. You can like our page on Facebook by searching for Brainstorm Podcast and follow us on Twitter at BrainstormPod. Thanks to our financial supporters, Zach, the Utah Outcasts, Bassett, Will, Aaron, Daryl, Destin Sucks, Lachlan, Destin Doesn't Suck That Much, Magnus, Michael, Positively Skeptical, Rob, and Stephanie. If you want to join them and help the show grow, then you can do that at patreon.com/brainstormpodcast. There's also the TeePublic store, and there's also the Shift to Reason Conference GoFundMe that you can donate to, and I will provide links in the show notes to those. I want to thank Dave for my intro music, and I want to thank Ian again for joining me for this interview. If you have anyone you think I should try to get to know better, send your suggestions to me at mail@brainstormblog.net. Okay, I think that's it. Thanks for listening, and remember, the truth matters, and so do people.
Sorry, my computer was just about falling asleep, so I just moved my mouse. Cut this bit.
Yeah, that works. I just had a weird thing happen.
That'll happen.
With my phone. I have a home phone, because that way my son's school can always call and leave a message, or if my son needs to call or whatever. But it just spoke for some reason. I'm not sure why. Oh well. So I guess